So you are here for some more awesome and fascinating presentations. This is session 14 called Kennels, Push Sleds, and Secret Missions. I am Leanna Williams. I'm a board member here for the Alaska Historical Society. I'm also a student here at UAF. So welcome to Fairbanks again. Today we have three presentations. Our first presenter is David Tomeo, who's going to be presenting virtually. Hi, David. David is a dog mushing ranger and the kennel manager at Denali Park and Preserve, and he has 30 years of experience as an educator and manager of field operations. And he's going to be talking to us today about preserving wilderness and the dog sledding culture. After that, keeping on the dog sledding theme, we have Tricia Brown with a presentation called Alaskan Sled Dogs in World War I, the French Army's secret mission. So if you heard Aaron Burmeister's talk earlier, he alluded to it, and Tricia's going to fill us in some more. So Tricia Brown has 30 books to her name, no small feat, for both children and adults, nearly all inspired by Alaska. I bet a lot of us have read at least one of them, if not multiple. Her most recent is a biography for adults called The Queen of Fairbanks, and Tricia is currently working on a nonfiction book for children about heroic sled dogs that served in the French Army during World War I, which she's going to be talking to us about today. And then last, we have Forrest Wagner and Emily Entrikin talking to us about Beyond the Pipeline and the Push Sled, tourism as Alaska's enduring lifeline. Forrest is a lifelong Alaskan and a PhD candidate in Arctic and Northern Studies at UAF. Deeply rooted in the state, he splits his time between Fairbanks, Juneau, and Naknek, and his research focuses on the intersection of discourse around tourism, sport, and the environment. And his co-presenter is Emily Entrikin, who is a seasoned Alaskan guide and a lifelong outdoors enthusiast who is deeply rooted in the state's wild places. A former sprint sled dog musher and engaged in scientific research, she brings deep experience to conversations about the value of Alaska tourism. So some really exciting topics we're going to be hearing about yet this morning. So we're going to be giving each presenter is going to go right in a row, and we'll save questions for the end. So without further ado, I hand it over to David.
All right. Hey, thanks, everyone. First off, I just want to ask Leanna, can you confirm, is the audio sounding okay for me?
I'm seeing thumbs up from all over the room.
Great. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks, everyone. It's a real honor to be here at this conference. Like Leanna said, I'm working at Denali National Park as the kennel manager. I came to Alaska about 30 years ago from northern Minnesota. The allure of dog mushing brought me north to Alaska, just like a lot of other people that got hooked on the dog mushing bug. So I can't quite see who's in the room. I'm going to assume that possibly out of this room, some of you have not been to our kennel. So for those of you unfamiliar with our kennel, I'll take you on a little trip here of the uniqueness of the Denali National Park kennel. So Zach, if we can get next slide. Our kennel in Denali National Park was established in 1922, just 5 years after the park was created. Zach, can I get next slide? There we go. Okay, good. So the park was created in 1917. 1922, the Kennels was established. Right now at the Kennels, we currently have 32 dogs. We use them for winter patrols, and then also the dogs and the kennel, they serve as ambassadors, educating the visitors about the traditional activity of dog sledding. Summer visitors flock to our kennel. We have 3 demonstrations every day in the summer months, and these dog sled demonstrations are the most popular ranger program offered in the park. In fact, they're likely the most popular ranger program offered throughout the state. We typically, this summer, we had 80,000 visitors again, breaking another record for visitation at our kennels. This summer, we're also excited. We had 7 puppies, and the puppies, we had a live puppy cam on our puppy pen there, and that puppy cam broke internet records for our website, the Park Service website. Just in June alone, we had 520,000 visitors to that web page with the puppies. So it's quite a popular activity, watching puppies all day long and into the night. So as the kennel manager, it's a real honor to be carrying on this tradition of 103 years of patrols, yet also for me and all the staff working there, it's an honor to educate people about a 10,000-year-old cultural tradition of dog sledding. So as I said, the kennels was established in 1922. It was established, Zach, next slide. It was established by this man here. This is Harry Karstens. He was quite a character. He was chosen to be the first superintendent because he was hardy and resourceful. A little bit about him. In 1897, at the age of 19, Harry Karstens followed the allure of gold and worked his way up to Alaska, and showing up in Seattle with no money, he bartered his way onto a northbound ship and got his way to Skagway. And then in Skagway, with no money, he began shuttling other people's supplies up over the Chilkoot Pass, back and forth over the Chilkoot Pass, until he earned enough money to gain his entry into the Yukon Territory. And what's also really interesting about him is he ended up working a claim on Henderson Creek, and he was just downstream from Jack London. And the two both ended up getting scurvy together, and in the hospital met, 2 19, 20-year-olds, and many believe that Karstens, the toughness, the uniqueness of his character, that he shows up shaping some of London's fictional characters later in his writings. Later, Karstens worked his way to Fairbanks, and from there he started a business hauling mail from Fairbanks to Valdez, and then also from Fairbanks to the Kantishna Gold Strike area. He became known as the 70-Mile Kid. There's a great book by Tom Walker, biography about Karstens, that I highly recommend. And Karstens then was also the lead climber for the 1912 Hudson Stuck expedition, the first to summit Denali. So needless to say, great qualifications for him to become the first superintendent of Mount McKinley National Park in 1921. And then his first big acquisition with working with the government was to purchase the first dogs for the park in 1922. He paid $45 a piece for dogs in 1922. He bought 7 of them, known as the 7 Brothers. So that's equivalent to $850 in today's value. And dogs were quite the necessity back then, of course. He needed them to establish the park boundary, to curtail the harvesting of Dall sheep in this newly established park. Finding good dogs was quite the challenge. He acquired them from Norman Hadley. Norman was a Nova Scotian fisherman, trapper, bachelor living on an island 20 miles south of Fairbanks. And that upper left photograph of Karstens standing next to the canoe, in Karstens' journals, he describes this event. Actually, he tells that he was returning the dogs to Norman Hadley's island in the summer for boarding. And bystanders watching him do this started taking bets on how quickly he'd capsize with all the dogs in the canoe. Ultimately, he and his partner, they lashed 2 canoes together to safely make it down the 20 miles downriver to Norman Hadley's island. So next slide, please. A little side note related to Fairbanks and Harry Karstens and the park is this film. It's an interesting story. 1923, in an effort to promote the new park, Harry Karstens agreed to assist in what was the first motion picture ever filmed in Alaska. The Chichakos was a silent melodrama. It's full of beautiful Alaskan scenery, love, intrigue, and villains. It's quite the story. The film has a deep connection to Fairbanks because it was funded and produced by Fairbanks' own successful businessman, Austin E. Lathrop. Harry Karstens and the dogs play a prominent role in the film. In the action climax scene of the film, it was shot on location in Denali with dog sleds, and Karstens playing a stunt double in the film. It is available now on YouTube, so I highly recommend anyone, if you have not seen the Chichacos, to check it out. It's quite an excellent little glimpse into our past. Next slide, please. So the 1920s and 30s at the park, the dogs were used for patrols, putting an end to wildlife poaching, establishing the park boundaries, and visitation continued to grow, and the public's interest in seeing the dogs was growing as well. They wanted to learn about these Alaskan sled dogs. So in 1939, the park offered the first formal sled dog demonstration. So here we are 86 years later, and the demonstrations haven't changed much except for the size of our crowds. Next slide, please. But some things did change over time here. 1942, the park and the Park Hotel became an R&R camp for the military. This is World War II. Also, all of the healthy dogs at the kennels, all the young, strong, healthy dogs were drafted into service by the War Department. And they were sent to bases all around the state, never to return to the park. And at the park, only the older dogs stayed behind, like this team in this photograph here. This is a dog team sitting here at the rail depot in Mount McKinley Park, waiting to shuttle visitors up to the Park Hotel. Next slide. So those older dogs at the park, they eventually started to die away, and eventually it came down to just one dog at the park, and that was this dog here. This is Buck. Rather than stay at the kennel, Buck resided down at the Park Hotel, living off leash, and he would mostly roam around, go down to the rail depot and greet arriving visitors into the depot. He was hugely popular. The park archives has many letters and postcards sent from visitors regaling their visit and their getting to meet Buck at Mount McKinley National Park. So eventually Buck did die in 1949 at the age of 13, and he was the last of the original dog lineage at the park there. But his death, because people always love the sled dogs at the park, triggered a renewed interest. And so within a few months, the military in 1950 gave the park a new team of sled dogs. But even with a small team there at the park, there were other forces that were still against the return of sled dog patrols in Denali. So can I have the next slide, please? The era's new technology gave many people the belief that sled dogs were inferior to machines like these snow jeeps here in these photographs. Some in park leadership thought the machines would give rangers greater speed and range of travel. Yet, like you see in the bottom photograph, sometimes the early technology didn't always live up to its expectations, and rangers learned some things the hard way, that there may be some good reasons to still travel by dog team instead. Next slide. So throughout the 1950s and 60s, there was very little patrolling going on by dogs in the parks. The dogs were primarily used for the demonstrations in the summer and to fetch mail in the winter. The superintendent's clerk would often be assigned a dog team to run down the hill and catch the train on Fridays when the mail came in at the park. Next slide. Through the 1960s and into the 70s, as we all know, there's a cultural undercurrent was occurring throughout America and in Alaska. This shift brought a new appreciation for Native rights, the value of traditional knowledge, and living closer to the land. This shift in thinking brought new appreciations for dog sledding. So even with that shift going on, the number of dog teams throughout Alaska and the villages continued to decline, caused in part by the advent of more reliable snow machines. But in Alaska, we know that there was efforts to counter this and work to preserve the state's declining dog teams. One of those efforts we know is Dorothy Page and Joe Reddington Sr. in this starting the Iditarod race to kind of draw attention to this this traditional activity. And then on the federal level, the 1964 Wilderness Act had a very significant impact on the value of the dogs that we kept at the national park. The act recognized dog sledding as an allowable traditional mode of travel in designated wilderness areas. So even though the park didn't gain official wilderness status until 1980, park leaders throughout the late 60s and 70s managed the area as if it were wilderness. And so with that was this renewed interest. And so we started building up our dog kennel at the park quite a bit and doing more dog sled patrols in the park. So next slide. Because of that recognition of dog sledding as a traditional mode of travel, we still use the dogs each winter for hauling supplies into or out of the park, like heavy timbers in for trail building like we did just last year, or hauling old debris out of parklands. Next slide. We also use the dog teams to support scientific work in the park. We carry scientists into their study sites by dog. We have our mushing staff. They'll collect data for science projects in the park. Or like last winter, here on the right side, this photograph is, we were called to make a run out to Polychrome and where they're building the new bridge over this landslide area. There's a live camera that was watching, keeping tabs on the landslide flowing underneath this new bridge that's going in there. And the camera suddenly went down and we were asked, can we go out and fix that camera? So we brought a bunch of tools and parts and went out there and fixed that camera. So the dogs are quite useful in many ways and a good way to get around. Next slide. So here we are 103 years later after the establishment of the kennels, and we're still using the dogs to manage the park, to honor the wilderness designation, and that wilderness promise to the American people, and to educate the public about this, this activity. The popularity of the kennels is extremely high with visitors. As I said earlier, the puppies, our live puppy cam, which is still live. You can pull it up on your phone right after this session and take a look at our puppies in the park. We're looking at over 1 million views on our puppies this summer alone. We also host hundreds of school groups that either come to visit the kennels and stay in the park as part of our education programs, or they partake in some of our online classes where they'll join us throughout the winter and talk to rangers at the park. And also one of the things that I love is we have it's really rewarding. We have this winter apprenticeship program where we recruit and create young mushers every year that work their way through our program, coming on patrol with us. I like to tell my staff that at the kennels in Denali, we are living historians, essentially. Our patrols and simply using these working dogs inspires people to care about this cultural tradition of dog sledding.
David, you got about 4 minutes left.
Yep, thanks. Okay, yeah, so preserving this cultural tradition of dog sledding is vital. It's a vital lifeline to our past, not only for honoring the indigenous peoples that brought dog sledding to North America from Asia, but also for maintaining this deep connection to the land and the history of the circumpolar region. Dog sledding represents knowledge and survival of or centuries of knowledge and our adaptations to living in the North Country and this dog-human bond. As modern technologies continue to replace traditional practices all over. Preserving this tradition ensures that future generations can learn from and appreciate the cultural identity that is embedded in dog sledding. So it's my hope that we're planting those seeds of appreciation in all the visitors that come to our kennel or visit us online, and they'll support us and the park for the next 100 years in Denali. So I'll wrap it up there, and yeah, thank you all, and look forward to questions at the end if you have any. And come visit Denali.
Thanks so much, David. That was fascinating. And I think there's probably a few people in the room that are pulling up the puppy cam right now. So our next presenter is Miss Trisha Brown, who's going to continue on the sled dog theme, talking about Alaska sled dogs in World War I. So right now we are going to be switching to that presentation.
Closing remarks.
Dang. Everybody get that? Board members hang out. We have to do a group photo. Was this morning really the best time for it? I didn't make this decision.
Nobody knows. Yes.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is really fun. I'm something of a sled dog, or I did a rod nut, so this has been real gratifying to hear, especially Aaron's talk this morning. I loved that. I'm going to be talking about this, it's kind of, you've heard little, maybe bits of it, and we heard from Aaron a little bit about the dogs that served for France. But this is going to be a global journey, beginning in Nome, across the North American continent, across the Atlantic, into France, across France to the French Alps, these sled dogs. In August 1913, the SS Victoria brought news from outside Alaska that the simmering Balkan War was affecting financial markets across Europe and the US, and even some Nome enterprises were suffering. The Nome Nugget that day said, "The fact that a war in southeast corner of Europe could exert an influence on the northwest corner of America is a vivid example of the strangeness of the times we live in." A year later, the simmering boiled over following the July 1914 assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife. Austria-Hungary declared war against Serbia. Russia declared war on Austria-Hungary. Germany declared war on Russia. And France and Britain declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. Although the U.S. would not enter the war till 1917, the multinational people of Nome were taking sides. One Nomite remembered, Nome was divided into two factions. Most of the Irish were against the Allies because of their hatred of England. The Scandinavians, because of their long affiliations, were sympathetic to Germany. Old friendships were broken. Immediately, two French nationals left Nome to serve in the Alsace-Lorraine region that bordered Germany. Once a French possession, the Alsace had been annexed to Germany since the Franco-Prussian War ended in 1871. The fighting there was among the bloodiest anywhere in the Great War. In the Battle of La Lange from July 20th to October 15th, 1915, many thousands were injured or missing. 17,000 men were killed. Whole villages were destroyed. Trees were denuded and the land scarred. Soldiers on each side of the mountainous boundary lived in the trenches for more than 2 years. The Gnome Frenchmen were each reserve officers with the Chasseurs Alpines, the Alpine Hunters. Second Lieutenant René Haas on the left there was attached to the 22nd Battalion, and Captain Louis Moufflet with the 62nd Battalion. On duty, they witnessed horses and mules virtually paralyzed, trying to move people, supplies, and munitions through the snowy, treacherous mountains. Both were experienced miners and mushers who knew that freight dogs could do the work of much larger animals, and they'd also witnessed the stamina and intelligence of the All-Alaska Sweepstakes racing dogs. They had the plan before they had the permission. That's common, huh? Appealing to their superiors, they urged, use sled dogs. This is what they're made for. On August 7th, 1915, France's Ministry of War approved the project, and Haas and Moufflet were commissioned to buy and deliver 400 sled dogs from Alaska and Canada. The French titled the top secret mission Poilus d'Alaska, or the hairy ones of Alaska. Poilu was a term of endearment for the elite fighting men, the Blue Devils, posted on the front lines. I imagine they were kind of hairy, scraggly. They attached it to the dogs now. The dogs and drivers of Nome were already famous. Each year, thousands of dollars changed hands in sweepstakes betting, and not just in Alaska. Race progress and finishing times were updated for major U.S. newspapers by telegram. The 1912 sweepstakes pitted John Ironman Johnson Siberians against Alexander Allen, Scotty Allen, and his so-called American dogs. Johnson was the speed record holder, but that year Scotty's Mutts took first place. By then, he was known as the greatest dog man in Alaska. Here he is about 1913. Haas sent his friend Scotty an encrypted message, a telegram with news of details of the mission. Haas and Moufflet sailed the Atlantic that August of 1915, while Scotty was evaluating his own kennel of champions, and he casually inspected the camps and villages for additional dogs while revealing nothing. The work was secret, yes, but if anybody caught on, the prices would soar. Allen had left Scotland at age 19 and traveled west across America in a series of work adventures that honed his animal handling skills. In 1897, he left his family for the Klondike in an overloaded ship, and 2 years later, he joined the Nome Rush. In Nome, he was ahead of his time, training dogs through positive reinforcement, keeping stalls clean and well-bedded with hay, and adopting the natives' use of sealskin or flannel booties on tender feet and flannel protective coverings on short-coated dogs. Scotty's favorite dog was Baldy, a stellar leader of mixed blood that included bird dog. By the way, there were all kinds of dogs, and I mean not just huskies, setters, pointers, you name it. It was a mixed bag, but he bred what he wanted. Baldy's progeny likewise showed greatness. In this sweepstakes race in these sweepstakes races from 1908 to 1917, Scotty took 3 firsts, 2 seconds, and 2 thirds. Scotty and Baldy's fame enlarged as his sponsor and kennel partner, Esther Birdsall Darling, wrote popular books for children, such as Baldy of Nome, Boris, son of Baldy, and Navarre of the North. Fictionalized accounts and mixed with nonfiction. Of course, Baldy was not going to be going to war. He wasn't going to be removed from the kennel. Allen and Darling couldn't part with the Tolman brothers, which is here Tom, Dick, and Harry, or the Irish Setter brothers, Irish and Rover. Scotty did choose Judge, Jimmy, Pete, Hindu, Priestess, Swimmer, Mongol, Ned, Navarre, and others. In all, Ellen and Darling tendered 28 of the 106 Alaskan dogs. 26 of them were Baldy descendants. For the balance, Scotty bought village dogs that showed promise. One old Frenchman in Nome, a veteran of the Franco-Prussian War, sacrificially offered his only dog, his beloved Napoleon, for the honor of France, refusing payment. Yeah. Okay, all was ready then when Lieutenant Rene Haas arrived in Nome in late August, while the Battle of La Lange was still ravaging both sides. Scotty had hired native craftsmen to make sleds, harnesses, and other gear. 2 tons of dried dog salmon and biscuits filled wooden crates, and Scotty made stackable travel kennels. Unable to find cooperation in the U.S. due to its neutral stance, Captain Moufflet went to Quebec to buy another 300 dogs from the region's French trappers and natives. All of Nome turned out when it was time to send off in early September. The SS Senator lay offshore, and the lighter was had already conveyed several tons of necessities, now to move the dogs. They'd been secured behind a barbed wire enclosure for safety. Germany sympathizers had made threats. Band music and phonographs blared French and American anthems, and the people waved flags of France and the US. Down the street, Scotty lined out a 350-foot rope onto which he'd rigged 53 metal rings spaced to attach pairs of dogs. 28 of his own obedient dogs were posted at the head of the procession to keep order. In the rear, the rope was attached to a heavyweight draft horses and a freight wagon filled with young women serving as ballast. In single lead was Spot, another trusted Allen dog, a favorite of Scotty's son, George. Spot would not be sailing to France, but Scotty needed him today because, as George said, he's fine in a crowd. And it was a noisy crowd. School was out. Bishop Peter Trimble Rowe had come to bless the troops, and those who had already lost a loved one were weeping. Scotty and the dogs boarded the freighter, or the lighter. He worried that his tow line might snap, but it held even with the draft horses leaning back and virtually dragged by the teams. The Senator was loaded within 3 hours. After a 9-day sailing, they arrived in Seattle, then on to Vancouver, where the Canadian Highlanders safely transferred the dogs to the Canadian Pacific Railway. The dogs traveled in 2 special Pullman cars, the people in another. At exercise stops, soldiers stayed alert for German spies. 3 times the train lingered in 24-hour stops. 3 times attempts to murder the men or poison the dogs were thwarted. At last, on October 27th, the Nome group rendezvoused with Moufflet in Quebec. Right up there. Don't have a... Traveling with horses, he'd gathered more dogs and brought them back by wagon. All told, in less than 2 weeks, the 2 teams had collected 436 dogs, 70 sleds and corresponding tack, and 5 tons of dog food. They housed the dogs in a spacious hangar next door to an ammunition test site. This was not planned. For days, though, the dogs were exposed to explosions and gunfire, and in time, they became used to it, no longer cowering or barking in response. It was serendipitous because the next phase would take them through submarine-infested waters of the Atlantic. No barking allowed. Scotty, this is a little side, Scotty had promised his wife Ellen that he would not go to France. He would turn around and come home. To help him keep his word, Ellen had hidden Scotty's passport. Skirting the problem, he secretly contacted a friend who witnessed his naturalization and got help to secure a certified copy. He was sticking with his dogs. Meanwhile, Moufflet was urgently looking for a ship. Every captain declined, fearing submarine fire. Finally, a rusty old steamer built in 1882, ironically named the Pomeranian, came out of retirement. When Captain Sandy McDonald said the dogs would travel in the hold, Scotty objected strongly, citing toxic air and general filth. He wanted them up on deck. Scotty won the argument after demonstrating he could keep the dogs silent with his presence and quiet words. 170 crates were chained to the deck. Alleyways between them allowed handlers to access and walk the dogs on leashes. The Pomeranian was the last ship out before the St. Lawrence Seaway froze up that winter. To avoid detection, the captain followed the British Admiralty's encrypted instructions for a zigzag route. MacDonald later admitted that the dogs were mysteriously silent during the greatest danger, saying, quote, "A blind man could not have said that there were dogs on board." Near the coast, 2 anti-mine trawlers escorted the Pomeranian to the Le Havre harbor on December 5th. In quick time, the cranes moved the kennels to trucks lined up in train formation, and within 2 hours, the crew and dogs were settled in a complex of old slaughterhouses. En route to the war front by train, they stopped briefly in Paris at the Bois de Boulogne, a vast public park created by Napoleon III to display the dogs to the public. Thousands came to see our little allies of the North. Next, it was on to Alsace to meet the waiting chasseurs alpines. Through Haas, the soldiers learned some necessary English like G, ha, and other commands. The French term march, became mush. The dogs were organized into 60 teams, each assigned a sled, 2 drivers, and 7 to 9 dogs. With Haas as interpreter for several weeks, Allen and Haas taught team positions and how to care for and drive dogs. And then it was time for Scotty to leave. Witnesses said it was heartbreaking to watch. News of his mission had leaked in Canada. The Montreal Daily Star ran an overblown story based on a fake interview with Scotty about how his wolves had gone over to eat Germans. At last, the Poilu d'Alaska and their mushers landed in Alsace in December 15th, 1915. While the others were traveling, Mouflet had overseen the building of 2 locations for their Alaska canine equipment sections. Backwards is Sika. The dog soldiers went to war. In one instance, for 15 days, soldiers with mules and horses were unsuccessful in transporting ammunition to an outpost through the snow. With the dogs, it took 4 days to move 90 tons of ammo. To and from the front, large freight sleds carried 650 to 800 pounds of supplies, equipment, ammo, wounded and dead men, regardless of the time or the weather. With an average speed of 5 miles an hour, the teams covered about 40 miles a day. A French reporter later interviewed Haas, in charge of Sika No. 1 and its 164 dogs, 40 of whom were French dogs. But Haas had disdain for those dogs. A reporter wrote, "They won't satisfy Lieutenant Haas. They tire too fast, can only work every other day, and their limbs are too fragile." In summer, they pulled carts. Loads could be heavier as there was less resistance with railway tracks. In his memoir, Goldmen and Dogs, Scotty wrote how teams laid almost 19 miles of telephone wire in a single night, reaching French soldiers who'd been isolated by the enemy. Aerial spotters had noted their location and were able to direct them to safety. Here, a wounded man is transferred from stretcher to a sled basket. Alaskans heard of the dog's exploits, like the glowing eyewitness report from Dr. Linus H. French that was in the Anchorage Daily Times, ran in June 1918. French and his partner had prospected Nome's Anvil Creek in 1900. A surgeon, he later oversaw the Kanakanak Hospital, then enlisted when the U.S. entered the war. Others who left for Nome included Fox Maule Ramsay, a wealthy British nobleman whose dogs competed in the All-Alaska Sweepstakes. And there was the French priest, Father Joseph Barnard of Mary's Igloo, who traveled the Seward Peninsula with dogs on his mission work. Called back home, Barnard left his team in Scotty's care. One day in France, he was reunited with some of his dogs. The Blue Devils marched in New York City to thunderous applause. Welcome, welcome to America. And the liberation of Alsace after armistice, 2 bloody years later after the US entered the war. For the first time in 40 years, there were Frenchmen in the city again. For the moment, later in the early 40s, Germany again annexed the Alsace for the duration of World War II. So what happened to the war dogs? The answer is tragedy and triumph. 6 dogs died on the Atlantic crossing. The first casualties, there was a collapse of some of the crates and dogs were crushed during a terrible storm. 9 of the Canadian dogs had to be put down when Scotty deemed them dangerously unmanageable. By war's end, France reported that about half of the remaining dogs died, mostly killed in action through gunfire or shelling. After armistice, most surviving dogs stayed with their mushers as important family members. They said they had couch and slippers in this thing I read about them. 3 gnome dogs were honored with the Croix de Guerre, or the Cross of War, which Esther Birdsall Darling accepted on behalf of her intrepid team of sled dogs. I love reading her stuff, by the way, you should look her up. And their feats, a Baldy descendant led a team urgently need musicians to an isolated regiment. When his musher was shot off the runners, the lead dog carried on, bringing the team to camp without a musher. Another dog, likely Navarre, right here, assisted nobly when severe blizzards stymied repeated calls for help in the French Alps. Lieutenant Haas himself hitched a team to run down the mountain, quote, in sweepstakes racing time. And there he chose 28 dogs to hitch in pairs to 14 light sleds, each loaded with ammo, and set out through whiteout conditions and under fire. They arrived after 5 days, saving the stranded men. Haas also received a Croix de Guerre. Here is a picture that I took at Carrie McLean. Thank you so much, Cheryl. And so there's a picture of the medal, although they have the medal on display there as well. And so it's an honor that is bestowed on very few. And 3 dogs were not named specifically, but we figured it out. I just want a quick run through what it looks like today. How did war change the Alsace? That's the trench fighting right there. And now tourists. Tourists walk through these trails. What was a wasteland now preserved as a touching outdoor memorial. They've preserved the barbed wire and everything there. The Lelange Memorial Museum is at 3,000 feet of elevation in the mountains there, and they have objects and uniforms of the Blue Devils and the German soldiers. And then 100 years later, 100 years after the dogs arrived, this is shocking. At Saint-Amérin in Alsace, French locals observe the centennial of the dog's arrival at the front. Near the old Sika-2 site, locals in folk dress led a parade holding framed photos of René Haas, Louis Moufflet, and Scotty Allen with Baldy. Walking with them were 70 sled dogs, some of whom were descendants of the sled dog soldiers. A contingent of German and French military were present, and the organizers unveiled a granite monument to the mushers and the sled dogs killed in combat. The stone is located near the site of Sika-1. In 2015, most Alaskans were unaware of the honor bestowed on their dogs and the 3 men from Nome's early days. Meanwhile, in the French Alps, they're still telling their stories.
Merci beaucoup, Trisha. Mais oui. For our final presentation, we have Forrest and Emily talking about tourism as Alaska's enduring lifeline. You two will have to share the microphone.
Test, test. Good morning, everyone. My name is Forrest. This is my colleague, Emily. We're here to talk about a crucial and often overlooked part of Alaska's history, the story of wildlands tourism as a vital lifeline. When we think of Alaska's history, two things often come to mind: the Trans-Alaska Pipeline and the legendary dog sleds of the Iditarod. These are our state's most famous lifelines, symbols of its economic power and rugged spirit. But there's another often overlooked lifeline that has been just as vital to Alaska's identity and future: tourism. This presentation will take you on a journey to the very beginning of modern wildlands tourism, introducing you to the pioneers who built this industry from the ground up. Our presentation is titled Beyond the Pipeline and the Push Sled, as we'll be exploring how this form of tourism has contributed to infrastructure, preservation, and community development in Alaska. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the Alaska Native Nations on whose ancestral lands our campuses reside. Here in Fairbanks, the University of Alaska is on the ancestral lands of the Dana people of the Lower Tanana River. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll take you on a journey through 5 distinct but interconnected stories from early pioneers to a modern-day guide. Our goal is to show how expedition-length wildlands tourism in Alaska is a complex, multifaceted lifeline shaped by a variety of personal and cultural experiences. The photo on this slide shows Emily captaining a rowing raft with clients on the Charlie River in Yukon Charlie Rivers National Preserve, which provides a perfect introduction to the type of work we'll be discussing.
Our central argument is that non-consumptive ecotourism at its best has served as a vital lifeline for Alaska. In this presentation, we're focusing specifically on expeditionary trips like backpacking and rafting in federally protected wildlands. We've identified 3 key themes that unify the stories of guides we'll discuss today: stewardship and preservation, the guide's role as an educator, and in economic and cultural realities of the industry. We believe these themes are crucial because they challenge the idea of tourism as just a commercial transaction. Instead, they show that it's an industry built on deep respect for the land and a commitment to the people. As we go through these stories, note how each guide embodies these 3 themes and how their individual perspectives add a new layer to our overall argument. The photo here is a classic image from 1977 of the Kobuk River. It's a custom trip that Jarn Yarnell built for his family. This image perfectly captures the spirit of early guides: small scale, personal, and deeply connected to the landscape.
First, let's look at the pioneers who laid the foundation for modern ecotourism in Alaska: Ginny Wood, Ramona Finoff, and Ron Yarnell. Beginning in the 1970s, these 3 guys represent the early Western approach to wildlands guiding. For them, the work was a direct extension of their environmental values. They saw their work as a form of preservation, actively advocating for the places they loved. Ron, for example, built his business on a philosophy that, quote, trees had value standing, end quote, a belief he'd held since childhood. They also embraced the role of the guide as an educator. Ginny Wood believed her job was to, quote, proselytize the importance of experiencing the wildlands firsthand, while Ramona and Ron focused on teaching clients the technical skills needed for survival. Finally, their stories highlight the difficult economic realities of the business. Both Ramona and Ron shared how challenging it was to make a living, and they relied on collaboration and mentorship to survive, proving that the industry was more about passion than profit. This view is of the Hula Hula River in 1987. For years, trips on this river would often end with a paddle to the Arctic Ocean, giving clients a sense of the vastness and remoteness these guides were so passionate about.
Our journey begins with Ginny Wood, a true pioneer who set the standard for what it meant to be a wilderness guide. Her story is one of unwavering dedication. Ginny first came to Alaska during World War II as not a tourist, but as a pilot flying bomber planes for the British Air Transport Auxiliary. This experience gave her a unique bird's eye view of Alaska's immense open spaces, and she fell in love. With her friend Celia Hunter, Ginny would go on to found the Alaska Conservation Society, one of the state's first and most influential environmental groups. Ginny also founded Camp Denali, a historic off-the-grid wilderness lodge in Denali National Park. Her guiding business, Tundra Treks, was a direct extension of her conservation work. Ginny had a, quote, pursuit philosophy, unquote, as she called it, believing that guiding was a way to proselytize the importance of experience the wild hand firsthand. Her trips were designed to be both a physical journey and a philosophical one. She taught her clients to leave no trace, not just for the next group, but for the land itself. She saw the negative impact of growing tourism, lamenting how beautiful places were becoming, quote, pockmarked with fire pits, unquote, and scarred by footprints. She believed that as long as there were no roads and people had to walk, the wilderness would be preserved. For Ginny, a guide's job was to transform clients into conservationists. She saw wild lands as sacred space that could be ruined by the masses if they were not protected. This commitment to conservation wasn't just a political stance. It was a foundation of her business and her life. Ginny's legacy is one of fierce advocacy and the powerful idea that tourism, done correctly, could be a tool for preserving the very places that draw people to Alaska in the first place.
And a nice quote from Ginny Wood: living off the land by use of the axe, the sheath knife, and the rifle have given way to new skills that have how to travel gently over the land, leaving as few traces as possible. Next, we turn to another foundational guide, Ramona Finoff, who built on Ginny's legacy by focusing on the power of collaboration and community. Ramona worked with Ginny and vice versa. Ginny even credits Ramona with teaching her how to raft. Ramona's guiding story, which began in the late 1970s, is a perfect illustration of how the industry was built on passion and shared purpose. As a single parent, she initially organized trips for friends and their children under a group she playfully named the Arctic Brotherhood Entertainment Committee, ABEC. This eventually grew into her full-fledged commercial business. Ramona's guiding philosophy was deeply rooted in community. She was a key collaborator in the Fairbanks guiding scene, working closely with figures like Ginny Wood and Ron Yarnell. She learned from her peers and in turn shared her own skills and business expertise. This collaborative spirit extended beyond just guides. She made a point of involving the remote communities she traveled to. By hiring local residents for meals and transportation, she created a vital economic connection that turned tourism into a genuine lifeline for these communities. Ramona's journey perfectly illustrates how the early guides saw their work as a form of preservation. She believed that by introducing people to these special places, she was securing their future. Her work was a direct, personal act of conservation that, as she says in her letter to us, quote, by introducing so many people to these special places, we may have had a greater impact on the preservation of wild lands. She knew that for her clients, these experiences shaped a lifelong appreciation for the wilderness. Her story also underscores the immense physical and financial challenges of the business. Ramona ultimately retired not from a lack of passion, but from the immense physical toll the work had taken.
All right. And finally, we come to Ron Yarnell, whose path to guiding was deeply shaped by his personal histories and values. A veteran of the Vietnam War, Ron came to Alaska in 1969 to study forest recreation. This experience fueled his guiding career, which was founded on a philosophy he held since childhood. Trees had value standing. For Ron, guiding wasn't just a business, it was a way of protecting the place he loved. Like Ramona and Ginny, who he worked closely with, Ron was a true pioneer, building his business in the 1970s when the industry was essentially unregulated. Ron also saw tourism as a crucial economic driver for the state. He suggests that tourism is one of Alaska's largest industries, regularly competing with fisheries as the second most significant sector after oil, while simultaneously generating more jobs and revenue than fishing, mining, and timber combined. But he feels this vital sector is underrepresented in state politics, with politicians often making decisions that favor large outside corporations over small local businesses. He even resigned from the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce over its stance on wolf control, which he believed would harm tourism. For Ron, this political struggle is about whether Alaska's resources benefit the many or just the few. Ron's unique perspective comes from his concept of big wilderness. Unlike the lower 48, where pockets of wilderness are surrounded by development, he describes Alaska as a place where urban areas like Fairbanks are surrounded by wilds. He argues that this unique landscape is Alaska's greatest resource, but it's threatened by development like the proposed Ambler Road. Ron believes that building one road through 250 miles of wild lands would, quote, completely change a huge region, unquote, that has only ever existed in the natural state. This commitment to preservation extended to his professional life. Even when dealing with bureaucracy, Ron points out the frustrating challenges of the permitting process. While the National Park Service was the easiest to work with, he had to fight for permits from the Bureau of Land Management, which were almost impossible to deal with, in his words. These experiences reinforce his belief that guiding industry needed stronger political support to survive and thrive. Ron's story underscores a foundational principle of the early wildlands tourism industry. Success was rooted in collaboration and passion, not solely profit. These values, coupled with a deep love for the land, education, and preservation, established a lasting, sustainable model for guides and communities alike.
Well, Ginny, Ramona, and Ron were establishing their businesses from a Western perspective. Another crucial narrative exists, that of Robert Thompson, an Inupiaq guide from Kaktovik. His perspective, captured in his essay Cultural Reflections and our interview with him last week, provides a vital indigenous viewpoint that challenges and enriches the historical narrative of Alaska's tourism lifeline. Thompson's view of the land is fundamentally different. He sees the Arctic not as a, quote, pristine wilderness, but as a lived-in space, a living cultural system. This is a pivotal point in our presentation because it shifts the entire conversation. It asks us to look beyond Western concepts of landscape and adventure to a deeper, more sacred connection to place. Thompson's perspective helps us bridge the gap between historical precedent and a more holistic view of wildland tourism today. His work embodies our three themes in a profound way. For Thompson, stewardship is not about advocating for a resource, but about protecting a living cultural system. For example, he says, the birds of the Arctic, quote, have no voice. So he must speak for them because their fate is intertwined with that of his people. The photo on this slide shows the kind of vast remote landscapes that are so critical to wildlands ecosystems. You can see the caribou migrations that the caribou migration that the Arctic Refuge is so famous for, Mount Mickelson in the background. The image was taken in 1990, the same decade Thompson's guiding career was in full swing, and it shows the deep connection he describes. Thompson's role as a guide is an act of cultural education and preservation. He shares his people's history and spiritual connection to the land with the visitors, transmitting a vital cultural service. He is a storyteller, not just a service provider. His work also shows that for some Alaska Natives, tourism isn't just an economic activity, but a cultural lifeline, a way to ensure the continuity of traditions and identity for future generations. His work as a guide and carver is a means to sustain his cultural heritage, not just a way to make a living. All this being said, Robert Thompson's role is not only profound, but also remarkably rare. To this day, he is the only indigenous wildlands tourism operator in the community of Kaktovik, which underscores just how critical his knowledge and business are to preserving this unique form of cultural exchange.
My experience over the last 17 years reflects and evolves the themes we've discussed, exemplifying the enduring philosophy of ecotourism in Alaska. I've worked for Arctic Wild, the contemporary name of the business founded by Ron Yarnell in the 1970s and now owned by Michael Wald and Sally Anderson. Over the years, I've seen our trips grow in popularity across wildlands. I see my role as a facilitator who creates the conditions for clients to discover their own connection with the land. This is a direct evolution of what Ginny would practice, fostering a deep appreciation for the little things. And what Robert Thompson modeled, helping people connect with meaningful ways with the landscape. The photo on this slide shows the unique challenges and experience of guiding in the Arctic. You can see overflow ice on the Hula Hula River trip, taken in 1992. Navigating these vast fields of ice is a constant early season challenge, but it also creates unforgettable stories and deep sense of connection to the land. I also am going to provide an update on the economic realities. While this work is still driven by passion, the industry still faces challenges, such as the need to improve legislative support for small businesses to meet client demand for locally owned trips. Viewing small-scale tourism as a renewable resource that needs to be nurtured. And this is a systematic barrier that goes beyond the entrepreneurial spirit of the early wildland guides, so central to our story. And finally, I offer a hopeful look at the future of stewardship. I believe, like Ramona, that connections clients make inspire them to protect wild areas, framing tourism as a lifeline not just for people, but for the landscapes themselves. My perspective is that the future of Alaska's ecotourism depends on the shared commitment to both people and place. To give you a sense of this impact, Chief Ranger Scott Samples shared that visitation to gates of the Arctic National Park was only 1,300 people in 1982. By the late 1990s, visitation had grown steadily to about 6,000 people. And post-COVID, visitation doubled again to almost 12,000 people. Organizations like Arctic Wild, as a commercial concession with excellent credentials, have directly contributed to bringing clients to these remote communities and wild places.
As we've seen by unifying these 5 narratives, wildland tourism in Alaska is far from a simple business transaction. The stories of Ginny, Ramona, Ron, Robert, and Emily's work with Arctic Wild show it's a complex, multifaceted lifeline shaped by a diverse tapestry of personal, cultural, and economic experiences. This is an industry built on passion over profit, mentorship over competition, and a deep-seated commitment to preserving the wild spaces that make Alaska so special. This legacy is worth acknowledging and celebrating, and it offers a model of tourism that has a vital place in Alaska's history and future. Importantly, this legacy is about protecting not just the places, but also the cultural systems and knowledge that exists within them. The image shows a paddle raft trip on the Kobuk River in 1995. As you can see, the remoteness of a trip like this is what makes it so special. We feel it's a powerful visual reminder of what's at stake. If the proposed Ambler Road were built, a bridge would cross the river right near this spot, and what was once a remote journey would become a drive-in experience. Losing this kind of remoteness would be a profound loss, in our opinion, for Alaska.
All right, and now to our session's title, Kennels, Push Sleds, and Secret Missions. This slide shows me racing my dog team in the late 2010s. While our presentation has focused on wildland tourism, the vital connection with dog mushing, community development, and tourism are obvious. As we wrap up, we'd like to thank those who made this presentation possible: Ramona Finoff, Ron Yarnell, and Robert Thompson. A special thank you to Karen Brewster for her work with Ginny Wood in the remarkable book, Boots, Bikes, and Bombers. And of course, final thank you to the guides, managers, and owners of Arctic Wilds. All right, time for questions.
Thank you so much, Forrest and Emily. That was wonderful stories and beautiful photos. I think we all enjoyed it. So now, yes, it is time for questions for all of our presenters. Zachary's going to handle the microphone from the audience side, and I'll pass it off to our presenters and to our online presenter.
Hello, I have a question for David.
You there, David?
Yes, I am.
Hi, David. I also work for the National Park Service here in Fairbanks. And I enjoyed your presentation. And I'm wondering, it's a double-barreled question. One is, can you say anything about the retirement plan for the dogs in the kennel there? And also, when they go out on a mission, are there trails, or do you stick to the road, or what is your idea about those routes?
Sure. Yeah. That's a two-part question. So the first one, the park, we have a retirement program. We have a website that people can apply for and adopt, put in requests to adopt our dogs. So all our dogs get adopted out as pets. And so you can search adoption Denali National Park, and you can see our webpage there and put in adoptions there. So we call it their 401 canine plan, where they get to go home and live out the rest of their years as pet dogs. We retired them age 9, so they still have many good years for ski joring, going hiking, being great pet dogs. So that's one of the it's slightly bittersweet to see them leave, but they become great pet dogs. And then the second part of your question is on the way we travel. So it is wilderness, so we don't have any trail grooming whatsoever, no snow machines breaking our trail. So we have bigger, long-legged dogs. We try to break the trail open with the dogs. When it's too deep for the dogs, we are out front skiing, snowshoeing, and putting in trails. We tend to follow just off the side of the road when we're going out in the central area of the park. The road is kind of high point for drainage in the summer, which is great to keep the mud down, but that makes it prone for winds blowing the snow off the road. So we tend to travel in the drainages near the roads if we're going out alongside the road there, and then we'll venture far from the road in certain places too, where we're just putting in trails where we know there's reliable snow and maybe a little bit less drifting. But it's all over the park like that. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Great. Tyler.
Well, hey, this is I guess I have questions for everybody, but I'll start with the last presentation. Have you guys thought about comparing Alaska to other sort of Arctic circumpolar places in terms of tourism? I know Alan Rowe wrote a book not too long ago, maybe it's a long time ago now, about it's called Inter-Russian Nature. It's about sort of the rise of national parks in the Soviet Union or national preserves. And I know before things got even weirder in Russia, that people were starting to go to like Kamchatka and other Arctic places, even in the Komi region. So I just was curious if you saw like a potential for expanding your fantastic, vision of Alaskan, or even comparing like tourism to other circumpolar places. And I guess the other question was, what about were there sled dogs in the Second World War? Because I had no idea that Alaskan sled dogs were sent to France at all.
Then I'll pass the mic to Tricia.
Thanks, Tyler. Definitely an opportunity for an expansion of the thesis. So very interested in circumpolar recreational cultures, recreational occupational cultures, but haven't done really any work so far.
Cool.
All right. And so the second part of the question was, were there sled dogs in World War II?
Yes. All countries by then had caught on to the wonder of using sled dogs in high places. And so while I'm more attuned to World War I, but yes, definitely there were innumerable more dogs
using them on the eastern front and the,
Yes, they were, yes.
wow.
I sense a future research project for Dr. Kirk.
My question is also for Trisha. I run a sled dog tourism business, and I was wondering if you think that I should tell my guests that Alsace was the time when Mausch turned into mush, or is there a specific like moment that we know
I'll
that
put a
happened?
pin in that one. But
Okay.
yeah.
Just generally keep saying.
I was also trying to work on my French accent. So
All right. I've been saying Canada.
Yeah.
My question is for Emily and Forrest. As far as tourism goes beyond like wilderness and wildlands, what sort of negative impacts exist with tourism in Alaska that can be mitigated through, I guess, better education and legislation and discussions about how tourism can be done responsibly? So things along the coast like cruises and people coming into towns and flying around and things like that.
I'm a little shy, but I'll just say a little bit. I think I would like to see a little bit more culturally sensitive or more like by touching base more indigenous side and see the depth and the history of that be amplified more. You know, and the perspective I'm coming from is more of the small business side, where a lot of our tourism right now is, especially like Princess and the cruise ship industry, which I think is great, and especially like renewable industry. But yeah, we need to keep an eye on it. And I think, especially Alaskans, we're very independent minded people, and I think we need to continue to push our representatives to represent small businesses for us locally, and to keep going forward with that instead of like the large big industries. Not that they shouldn't be here, but definitely keep pushing for small businesses for our communities. Forrest, you have something to say?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the tourism phenomenon is fascinating, but everything has pros and cons. And partly what we're advocating is for a scaled approach. One of the last slides highlights Arctic Wild, a local business. One of their business practices, which I really admire, is that they tend to hire local people to interpret the landscape. So there's obviously the skills needed to run the expedition, but also this idea that, yeah, that there's a small scale piece that gets maybe a little bit kind of generalized in large scale tourism. And as a phenomenon, it's fascinating. There's more people traveling this year than any other year ever, a UN statistic, but all of those concerns with tourism are valid.
Up on cultural tourism. Every spring, there's a cultural tourism conference based out of Sitka, and they were here in Fairbanks this spring, and it exactly emphasizes this idea of indigenous storytelling, indigenous run businesses, going to the small local businesses, supporting our local communities, and acting as that sort of balance to these massive corporations that are coming in and bringing millions of people. There's also a fantastic film that Ellen Frankenstein just did about cruise ships coming into Southeast and the impact and that conflict between local communities and industry and the dollars and cents of tourism. So I think it's wonderful, you know, this work that you guys are doing. There's a whole amazing literature out there about cultural tourism in Alaska going back over 150 years. So
That perspective, Angie.
This is for Forrest and Emily. As you guys may know, there's a fellow named Stephen Mather, who's the first director of the National Park Service and just did a tremendous amount to making it possible. And one of the things he did before becoming director is to encourage people to appreciate the wilderness. He did with the kind of thing you're talking about, had these things called the Mather Mountain Parties, where he was very wealthy, and he'd take maybe 20 or 30 important business people and politicians into the wilderness, along with a Chinese cook and real silverware and plates and so on. but it was obviously probably not the kind of thing that you're associated with every day. But it's same principle, it seems to me, in terms of getting advocates for keeping the trees and respecting the wilderness by bringing people out there. And I'm just suggesting or saying that obviously your 5 people are crucial, but are there other influencers that you think of in terms of the history of what you guys are doing?
Not quite sure if this will touch on it, but yes, as a guide, I have been on trips, and we do go on trips with influencers and representatives and congresspeople and senators. There's definitely organizations and push to get quote unquote more influential people to help, so they can come and see the importance of it to be able to represent tourism and as a way of, as a renewable resource for preserving. So I would say I've been on some of these trips with people, but we definitely don't go out of our way to bring fancy silver or china. Definitely not.
Now, Forrest, I'm wondering if you might be able to touch on the more historical 19th century, early 20th century perspective on this. I think that is where we're going with that question.
Yeah, at least the way I read the literature really is coming from the Enlightenment and the idea that wildlands are something desirable crosses the Atlantic, and it's in Emerson and Thoreau, and there's so many great sources and academics even in this room that can talk about wilderness and wildlands and this rich American imagination about what that means and how it's really traveled the world and become an idea that also relates to conservation versus preservation, and that in Alaska, in that way of, is it similar or different from everywhere else? One of those exceptional things about wilderness, when we designate those areas, they're already peopled. They were peopled before, and so I mean, when we talk about tourism and add some language about decolonization, it becomes richer for me. It becomes more real. Wilderness is this place where there's no people, but that's a myth. That's not really, and even in our project, there are other voices. Arctic Treks, for example, is an early wildlands guiding business here in Fairbanks, and it's a relatively young thing in relation to the Wilderness Act as a sort of like historical moment, but moving forward with continuing pressures to develop either adjacent or through preserve federal wildlands. I mean, I think there's this underlying political moment going on here in Alaska that's also a kind of very American one. Did I answer your question?
After producing it, that better to say, are you aware of or working with the historical antecedents? It's more kind of the, I'm sorry, it's more the, I think Emily really took it in the right direction.
Yeah.
Are there ways that you are influencing influencers as well as just the general public in terms of your tours? And it sounds like you are.
One of the commonalities in work I've done with guides like Emily is that most guides let the land speak for themselves, let the land speak for itself. They let the land speak for itself. And so.
Glad to hear it.
We have about 10 more minutes, so time for plenty more questions. Emily has a question.
I have questions about the trails. Well, a common question, trails and cabins that are used by the Denali sled dog kennel. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
I was curious, in the future, are you going to see the allowance of the public and local dog mushers be able to utilize your great cabins for overnight stays?
That's a difficult question for me to answer. Right now, they are historic patrol cabins that are used for active work in the park. So that we have not traditionally offer those up for rent, like you do in, let's say, the White Mountains. That said, there's the routes, the trails that we break open in the park. We are eagerly inviting people to come use those and camp in the park. But as you likely know, it's hauling all your camping gear is a whole extra load for your dogs. That said, on my personal opinions, I'd love to see us develop that. I can relay that the concessionaire in the park is actually turning over. There will be some news coming out later this winter with mushers being offered to bid on whether it be a full concession or a commercial use authorization. There will be some great discussion and planning going on of what that means. The former concession contract did have access to some portable cabins on trailers that were moved around. So I would love to see those used in multiple ways, and it's yet to be determined what we'll decide on that from park leadership.
We have any more questions?
Just one quick note that there is quite a history of tourism going back to after the gold rush, people coming up to places like Glacier Bay and visiting the spectacular scenes there, as well as the Great Circle Route, which took people up on the train and down with the steamboats. And they really got a chance to see interior Alaska. And it was because of the transportation systems that made that possible. So there is an extended history. Roderick Nash has written some about that. I recommend it. Yeah.
This is totally off topic, but about 5 years ago, my husband was on a raft trip, and a pack raft trip in Anwar, and ran into a guide named Emily with Alaska Wild, who immediately gave he and his partner a lecture because they were not wearing dry suits. I don't know if you remember this. Yes.
And they were,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't remember that part. I remember giving them chocolate and being excited for them. But I guess I was also worried about their safety.
You didn't hear the end of the story because the next year he went under the ice on the Conga Cut for about 5 minutes with his dry suit, and it saved his life. So I want to thank you.
Wow, that was your husband. And I heard that story that following year. I'm so glad and that we were all surprised. And it definitely, him opening up definitely educated us more. And I think the general public, especially the rise of the pack rafting scene. And I think his experience definitely, I think, are going to help people further. Thanks for sharing. That's wonderful.
Wow, what a small world and what an amazing story. Anyone else?
Wants to know how old Baldy was when he died.
How old was Baldy when he died? 15.
With the family, Scotty Allen's family went to Berkeley, and that's where Baldy died. And he was buried on their property with a rose bush over him and a little flag with 16 stars for 16 of his dogs that died in the war.
I just can't follow that. Well, I think, do we have any questions from anyone watching via Zoom? No questions?
Nothing.
Okay. Well, it sounds like they're wrapping up next door as well.